Hey everyone, we always think an oil crisis means there is not enough oil, long lines at gas stations, oil prices doubling, and calls to conserve oil. But after reviewing all the major oil price crash analyses from the past half century, I came to a rather uncomfortable conclusion. What truly shatters the global economy has never been the shortage itself, but rather the fear of shortage amplified by the financial market, supply chain structures, and geopolitical forces simultaneously. Every time. It is this same pattern. The 2026 crisis will be no exception except this time. These three forces are colliding completely for the first time, and the impact points are deeper, more fragile, and harder to repair than ever before. Since 1948, the United States has experienced 12 formally defined economic recessions. If you overlay these 12 recessions with the oil price trends from the 12 months prior, you will find an almost mystical pattern, except for the 2020 recession triggered by the pandemic. Global oil prices soared by over 30% before the other 11 recessions. Before the first oil crisis in 1973, prices rose by 400%. Before the Iranian Revolution in 1979, they rose by 150%. Before the Gulf War in 1990, they rose by 130%. Before the 2008 financial crisis, that round saw a 96% increase. This is no coincidence. Soaring oil prices push up inflation. Inflation forces central banks to raise interest rates. Interest rate hikes shatter corporate cash flow disruptions, trigger layoffs ignite consumption contraction, and consumption contraction drags down GDP. This entire chain typically takes 9 to 14 months to complete. As of today, as I am writing this article, global oil prices are already 40% higher than pre-war levels. Diesel has risen by 35%. Gasoline prices in California have broken above $5.6 per gallon, surpassing the historical record. If we follow that iron rule, we are most likely in the third month of this transmission chain, meaning the worst part has yet to come. This is my most direct first judgment about this crisis. It is not about whether there will be a recession, but rather which country will experience the recession first when it will arrive, and how severe it will be. Many people compare this situation to 1973, concluding that since we got through that one, we will get through this one too. I must say very bluntly, this analogy is wrong and wildly so. Each reason I will explain stands independently. Firstly, the transmission speed. In 1973, global supply chains were slow. Inventory was generally held in months. Cross-border trade involved 30 to 60-day sea shipping cycles. Retailers had ample buffer time to absorb upstream costs from the oil price shock to the CPI reaction. It took an average of 6 to 9 months. Today is completely different. Over the past 30 years, global supply chains have been completely transformed by Toyota's just-in-time production. The average inventory turnover days compressed from 60 days in 1990 to 28 days in 2024. Cross-border e-commerce further pushed this number down to within a week. Cold chain logistics, fresh food e-commerce, and the express delivery industry are all built on the assumption of next-day delivery. This means that if diesel prices rise by just 20%, it can fully transmit to every item on the shelves within 2 to 3 weeks. What we are experiencing today is the fastest energy shock in human history in terms of transmission speed. Secondly, the leverage level. This is what I consider the most important point. When the 1973 crisis broke out, global non-financial sector debt to GDP was approximately 2% today. That figure is approaching 250%. China's corporate sector debt to GDP is 165%. American households and businesses combined are over 230%. Japan's government debt to GDP is already 260%. This means that the same magnitude of energy shock today can leverage at least 2.5 times the chain of defaults compared to 1973. This is not hyperbole. It is a simple calculation. Rising energy prices do two things simultaneously. First, they directly increase corporate operating costs. At the same time, inflation forces central banks to raise interest rates, increasing financing costs. In a low-leverage world, companies can endure by relying on cash flow. In a high-leverage world, if financing costs go up by just 200 basis points, a large number of zombie companies will burst consecutively within 6 months. Within the next 12 months, there will be at least 3 to 5 financial institution failures globally, on a scale equivalent to Lehman Brothers in 2008. The likely directions are regional banks, commercial real estate, and private credit. The logic is simple. These were the sectors that took on the most leverage in the low interest rate environment of the past decade. Finally, the buffer for alternatives. After 1973, Western countries did something that still benefits them today. They established strategic petroleum reserve systems. The U.S. SPR at its peak held 727 million barrels of crude oil, equivalent to about 90 days of U.S. import demand. However, over the past 3 years, the Biden administration, in order to suppress oil prices and stabilize the election, released the SPR to its lowest level since 1983. At one point, only 340 million barrels remaining. Although Trump vowed to replenish it upon taking office, the replenishment rate was far slower than the consumption rate today. The actual available reserves of SPR are only enough to cover about 35 days of imports. The IEA's recent Organization of Countries to Release Emergency Reserves sounds grand, but it is actually just digging through already depleted reserves. Its psychological significance outweighs its practical significance. This is why I am very skeptical of the official statements that the policy toolbox is still full, as a large portion of the tools in the toolbox has already been used up in the past 3 years. Speaking of this, I want to turn to a dimension of this crisis that is most easily underestimated, but also the one I most want to explain clearly. If you only focus on oil prices, you will severely underestimate the destructive power of this event. What truly sends shivers down my spine are the second-order impacts of the oil crisis, those areas that no one is watching but collapse faster and recover slower. The most underestimated area is fertilizer. 1/3 of global fertilizer trade passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Qatar alone supplies 14% of the world's urea. Urea is the most widely used nitrogen fertilizer in the world, essential for everything from rice in India to soybeans in Brazil to corn in the American Midwest. After the Strait blockade, Qatar's largest fertilizer plant completely ceased production. Nearly 1 million tons of fertilizer cargo are physically stuck in the Persian Gulf. And here's a fact that most people do not know: no country in the world has ever established strategic fertilizer reserves. Not one crude oil can be sustained for 35 days by the SPR. But a fertilizer cutoff cannot be sustained for a single planting season. Spring planting in the Northern Hemisphere begins in March and continues until May. If this window is missed, the next crop will directly see a 15 to 25% reduction in yield. This is not a price increase problem, it is a problem of not having enough to eat. The United Nations World Food Program has already warned that if the conflict continues until mid-year, an additional 45 million people globally could face acute food insecurity. In plain language, this means their daily caloric intake falls below the minimum required to sustain life. In the latter half of 2026 to the first half of 2027, there will be at least 2 to 3 national-level food crises globally. Secondly, helium. This may sound obscure, but it is the lifeline of the semiconductor industry. Qatar supplies 1/3 of the world's helium, 65% of South Korea, as helium imports come from Qatar. In semiconductor manufacturing, helium is used to cool the silicon wafers in lithography machines, protect the welding environment, and prevent oxidation reactions. Samsung and SK Hynix, these two South Korean companies combined, produce 2/3 of the world's memory chips. After the Strait blockade, Qatar's helium production ceased along with its LNG plants. Samsung's current helium inventory can last about 8 to 10 weeks. SK Hynix might be even tighter. If the supply disruption continues beyond May, global DRAM and NAND prices will likely rise by 30 to 50%. The downstream impact of this event is extremely far-reaching. It is not just about mobile phones and computers becoming more expensive. More critically, the cost structure of AI servers will be disrupted. Almost all the high-bandwidth memory required for an H100 server is exclusively supplied by SK Hynix. And NVIDIA's and OpenAI's capacity expansion plans are all built on the assumption of stable HBM supply. If the helium supply disruption continues until June, the cost of training global AI large models will increase by at least 10%. This will directly affect the valuation logic of OpenAI's next round of financing. A Middle East war will ultimately be transmitted to Silicon Valley's valuation tables through the obscure, almost unnoticed threat of helium. This is the true topological structure of globalization in 2026. Another factor is water. Over 90% of the drinking water in Gulf countries comes from seawater desalination. For Qatar, this figure is 99%. For Kuwait, it is 90%. For Bahrain, it is over 90%. There are over 400 seawater desalination plants along the Persian Gulf coast. In March, a desalination plant on Iran's Qushem Island was hit. This incident is quite intriguing. Iran attacking its own water plant on its own territory. Either it was an accident, or it was sending a signal to the West that I am even willing to attack my own. The next day, Iran used a drone to hit a desalination plant in Bahrain, causing water supply interruptions to 30 villages. In mid-March, missiles landed about 12 miles from Dubai's Jebel Ali port. There is a desalination complex there consisting of 43 units with an annual water production exceeding 160 billion gallons. Once facilities of this scale are affected, millions of people will not face price increases, but rather will find no water when they turn on their taps tomorrow. This is why Gulf countries are frantically calling the United States. Oil can be not sold, money can be not earned, but water cannot be lacking. But I want to talk about the aspect of this crisis that makes me most wary, but which the media has barely delved into: the financialization mechanism. I will start by stating a point. Oil is no longer just a commodity, it is a financial derivative. The daily trading volume of paper oil on the New York Mercantile Exchange and ICE is more than 20 times the actual physical delivery of oil. This means that 70% of oil price fluctuations come from expectations and 30% from physical supply and demand. In the 1973 oil crisis, this ratio was roughly 30% to 70%. In 2008, it was 50 to 50 today. It is completely reversed, when the pricing of a commodity is 70% determined by expectations. It is no longer a commodity market, but an emotional market. This explains why the market reaction when major insurance companies in the Gulf region collectively withdrew war risk insurance on the 5th of March was even greater than when missiles hit oil tankers. The logic is this: without insurance, banks do not lend. If banks do not lend, ports do not accept cargo. If ports do not accept cargo, the strait closes itself. The entire global shipping system is built on actuarial models for insurance. As long as the actuarial model collapses, whether physical ships can sail is completely irrelevant. Economists call this strategy actuarial warfare. Iran does not need to hit every ship. It just needs to hit enough to collapse the insurance company's actuarial models. The rest will be automatically completed by the market. In the next decade, every medium-scale geopolitical conflict may replicate this playbook. This is not a problem with oil. This is a systemic vulnerability in the pricing mechanism of all major commodities. LNG, iron ore, copper, rare earths, grain, any market that relies heavily on maritime transport, plus insurance plus financial derivatives. Pricing is exposed to the same risk field. We spent 30 years using financial engineering to optimize global trade, squeezing costs in every link to the absolute minimum. The cost of this is that the vulnerability of every link has been maximized when there is no redundancy in the system. An attack on any node is fatal. Something else is also happening. Iran currently exports about 1.2 million barrels of crude oil to China through a shadow fleet. A shadow fleet refers to gray oil tankers that turn off their AI signals, use falsified flags, and complete ownership transfers on the high seas. All this crude oil is settled in RMB, bypassing the dollar system. Since the war began, 11.7 million barrels of Iranian crude oil have been settled in non-dollar currencies. This figure is certainly not large compared to the total global oil trade, but its significance is immense. This is the first time in 52 years since the establishment of the petrodollar system that there has been a systemic crisis-driven and replicable workaround. Before this, non-dollar oil trade by Russia, Iran, and Venezuela was passive, fragmented, and did not pose a systemic challenge. This time is different. Asian insurance companies have already started quoting maritime insurance premiums in RMB. Several major commodity traders in Singapore have started accepting spot contracts priced in RMB. Hong Kong's offshore RMB liquidity pool has expanded by 18% in the past 2 months. The infrastructure is being built up. Sovereign wealth funds in Saudi Arabia and the UAE are quietly accumulating RMB assets to hedge. This crisis is not about this round of oil price hikes, nor is it about whether a recession will come. It is about the fact that it has provided a free and thorough stress test for de-dollarization. And this test currently appears to have passed. This means that in the next 5 to 10 years, the dollar's share in global commodity trade will fall from today's 88% to below 70%. This is not a doomsday prophecy. This is a gradual process that is already happening. It is just that the 2026 war has accelerated its pace by at least 3 times. So let us reconsider. Every recession since World War II has been preceded by an oil price surge. Today, oil prices have risen by 40%, diesel prices have risen by 35%. The daily traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has dropped from 100 vessels to single digits. 1/3 of global fertilizer is still stuck in the Persian Gulf. South Korea's helium inventory is running low. 1.2 million barrels of RMB, settled crude oil from the shadow fleet, are heading to China daily. These events individually are not fatal, but they are happening simultaneously and reinforcing each other. This crisis will eventually pass. The Strait of Hormuz will reopen one day. Oil prices will also fall back, but some things will not return to what they once were. For example, the moment insurance companies realized they could be weaponized. For example, the moment the first RMB settled oil tanker successfully docked. For example, the moment global supply chains realize that just-in-time production is vulnerable in the face of war. Once these moments happen, they are irreversible. What we are experiencing is not an ordinary energy crisis, but the deepest restructuring of the global economic order since the collapse of the Bretton Woods system in 1971. Only this time, it started from a 21 nautical mile wide strait. What else will come in the future? Thank you for watching this video. This is the Jia Yu Lun channel. Follow me to learn more about the stories behind finance. See you next time.